Greetings and welcome to 303 and Senior English A. We now turn back to our study of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I'm with you in your hymnal on page 115, and we are now looking at what I hope in your login information you have written down as the final lines of the general prologue. The final lines of the general prologue. So let's go ahead and write that down somewhere, either at login information or at level 1. That's what we're looking at now. Now let's just review and make sure that we know where we've been. Chaucer tells us that in the very opening lines of the general prologue, that in the spring, when life starts to awaken, animals get twitter-pated and hanky-panky, people long to go on some kind of trip or journey, pilgrimage, a holy journey. He says that in England, the favorite spot was Canterbury, down to see the blissful martyr Thomas à Becket. Then he tells us, I myself, he said, got caught up in the fever of wanting to travel, and so I was hanging out at a bar, right, in Southwark, an area of London called the Tabard, when into the bar came a group of people who told me they also were going on holy pilgrimage, and so all of us together decided we would travel together. And then he pauses and he says, but before I get any further down the road, no pun intended, let me explain to you the group of people who were a part of this entourage. And then he just starts listing off people, starting with the knight and the knight's son, the squire, and the yeoman who attends them, all the way down. And now, hopefully in your annotations, you've got all those characters listed, and you've got 1 or 2 or 3 things listed about each one of them. And as we've been moving through this general prologue, we have pointed out that word, I hope it's in your notes again, at to be satire. We're going to need to have that word at to be. Right now, let's write it down again. Satire. Remember, to be the rhetorical study of a text, not what the poet or the author says, but how the author says it. And Chaucer is engaging in what we call satire. Say one thing, mean something else. Sometimes understood as sarcasm. Obviously, we have the word irony that often attends. Now, Chaucer didn't invent this concept, as we've said. It was rather really popularized by the great Roman writers, Horace and Juvenal. The Horatian type of satire is a kind of soft, funny satire. To say about the nun prioress that she was by no means undergrown means that she was not a thin woman, but rather a fairly large woman. But it's not a nasty, biting thing to say about the nun prioress. She probably would laugh along and say, yes, it's probably true. I should have fed my dogs more and myself less, something like that. Juvenalian satire, to follow the great Roman writer Juvenal, however, is nasty, biting satire. To say about the friar, for example, that he was a wanton one in marrying, that he would marry off his women that he could find within his church, these are kinds of lines that no one is going to consider to be funny unless they're standing on the outside looking in going, ooh, burn, that was a good one. That's Juvenalian satire. And so we've been working through these characters. There's 2 different ways to divide these characters up. Let's review. One way to do it is to look at them as either being religious or non-religious. And by here, we don't mean that by religious, we don't mean go to church. That's not our term. Everybody in 1400 goes to church. And by the way, the only church we're talking about is the only church in existence. That's the Roman Catholic Church. If you grew up going to church and it wasn't in a Roman Catholic church, you grew up going to what's called a Protestant church. And that kind of church doesn't even exist until after Martin Luther in any kind of formal way, okay? So we're talking about the Roman Catholic Church. So everybody is religious. But when I use the term religious, in this term, I mean people who are employed, if you wish to use that language, they're affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church. In other words, they're priests, they're nuns, that kind of thing. Okay, and then we have everybody else as a second group. All right, no question, in Chaucer's entourage, the largest number of people that are of great importance are those people, which seems to lead us to think that maybe Chaucer had a beef with the church or he wanted to reform the church in some way. We sometimes talk about this as Chaucer, the early pre-Lutheran, as we've said, reformer. Another way to kind of divide up this group of travelers is to see them from their, let's write it down, socioeconomic perspective, right? Socioeconomic. In other words, what kind of bank do they have, right? What kind of money do they have? Do they come from wealth? We think, for example, of our Franklin, that landowner. Or do they come from the kind of lowest group? We think, for example, of that plowman whose job it is to pick up dung and take it out into the fields. Yuck. Okay? And then, of course, you have those middle class kinds of people like that guild fraternity. All right? So that's another way to think about it. And that's a significant way to think about this entourage when we meet them. For example, when we meet the wife of Bath later, she is actually going to point out that one of the ways she controlled her men, her husbands, was by talking about who gets to have the Visa card, the credit card. That is to say, who has the key to coffer doors. In other words, who gets to control the finances within the family. We're also told by the wife of Bath she made a monumental mistake in her last husband because she did not marry for money, she married for love, and she married a young, stunning, handsome-looking kid who basically tried to control her, and ultimately they got into a major fight, and she'll talk about it in her own specific prologue. Now, we've worked with the Sumner, we've worked with the partner. Those are the last two characters that he introduces. And again, just to pause for a moment and remind, Chaucer makes all this up. It is his poetic genius. He never actually took a trip like this with all these characters. He made all of them up, yes? But now we come to the end, and I'm with you on page 115, and we just finished with his discussion of the partner. And now we have two things remaining to do. This will be significant and a powerful moment in our study of Canterbury Tales, as Chaucer now will turn at line 735. I hope you're there with me. 735. Chaucer will say, "Now I have told you," it's kind of a joke, shortly in a clause. For those of us that have been sitting trying to read through this, we'll say about this list of group of entourage, anything but short. But in some ways it is kind of short. Here's why. We don't know still a lot about the partner. We know something about the partner. So when we meet the partner's specific prologue, we're going to know a whole lot more about him when he introduces himself in a little bit. "Now I have told you shortly in a clause the rank, the array, the number, and the cause of our assembly in this company in Southwark at that high-class hostelry known as the Tabard, close beside the Bell." Now I should point out, there is some irony here that has to be explained to you. In this district of Southwark, there was a hotel called the Tabard. It's set right next to an establishment, I'm going to do PG-13 here, called the Bell. Now, what was the Bell? Well, apparently the Bell was a place where men went to enjoy themselves with female company. So notice here the irony as he says that high-class hostelry, right? And now we go back to the opening lines of the general prologue where he says he was most devout at heart as he was getting ready to go on holy pilgrimage. And all of a sudden we get a little bit of a chuckle out of this. Before I went on holy pilgrimage, I had to go visit a prostitution house or something very, very close to it. Ha, ha, ha. You can kind of see the ironies here, right, as they build. And now, line 740. "The time has come for me to tell you how we behaved that evening. I'll begin after we had alighted at the end, then I'll report our journey stage by stage, all the remainder of our pilgrimage." So in other words, he says, I've kind of set you up. Let's go ahead and put it in our notes this way. Chaucer sees the general prologue as an introduction. Let me introduce to you the characters. By the way, let's just point out really quickly at 2b, who has not yet been introduced? Think about this. Who has not yet been introduced? The knight, introduced. The Sumner, introduced. The partner, introduced. But who has not been introduced? The one telling us about all of this. That is to say, Chaucer, or the voice of the poet. Often in poetics and in studies of literature, we don't want to confuse the actual poet with the poet's voice. But whoever it is, the person telling us all of this has not introduced himself at all. Like, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and this is blah, blah, blah." Hasn't said any of that. But now he will pause. And he's going to make a, write it in your notes, personal statement. Now this personal statement is going to be loaded with irony, and it's also going to show the genius of Chaucer's poetic vision. But first, I'm on page 115, line 745. These are, of course, lines that we will come back to and reference many times in our study of Chaucer to show just how bright he is. Can we just set this up, though, at level 1 by saying the following? Chaucer is aware that he is an iconoclast. Iconoclast. To be iconoclastic means you take out that metal aluminum softball bat and you start bashing holy icons, sacred cows, ideas that matter to people. When you say about the friar that he liked to hanky-panky a lot. When you say about the partner, a churchman, that he loved to come into town and find his next girl in a bar. You are doing and saying something that large numbers of people are going to be, our O word, offended by. That's what an iconoclast is. Chaucer knows already he's offended a large number of people, of readers, and he hasn't even started with the stories yet. So you know that we've got more coming of this offense. So he will pause for a moment at line 745, and he says the following. Read it with me. "But first I beg of you in courtesy not to condemn me as unmannerly, if I speak plainly and with no concealings, and give account of all their words and dealings, using their very phrases as they fell." Now let's pause and make sure we have it in our notes what he's just said. Simple. Before I go any further, he says, "I beg of you in courtesy, therefore, I hope you will listen to what I'm asking of you. I beg you, I ask you, please don't condemn me as unmannerly if I use the very words that these guys used." Two observations. One, Chaucer wants us to imagine that he is like the first journalist, embedded journalist, following this group of people along, and he's simply just writing down whatever it is that they said. The irony of this, of course, is what? Chaucer made it all up. But be that as it may, he wants you to imagine, here he is traveling along with this group from London to Canterbury. They get tired, they pull over to the side of the road, they break out the brewskis and have a few drinks, and then all of a sudden the partner's going to stand up and say, "Hi, I'm a partner. Let me tell you about myself." He's going to introduce himself in a specific prologue. And then he says, "I'm going to tell you a story," and he tells a story. And Chaucer wants us to imagine that he's just going to write down the very words that they spoke. But before he does it, he says, "I hope I don't offend anyone if I use the very words." Point number two. Now this reminds me, as I say in another lecture, this reminds me of my daughter Ash when she was very young. And she came home from school, and sitting around the dinner table that night, she had to tell us about the bad boy at school on the playground who used the bad word, and then she drops the F-bomb. And Mama goes, whoa, we don't use the F-bomb in this house. You don't? And my Ash goes, "No, it wasn't me. It was the bad boy on the playground." And then she says it again. And Mom goes, "Honey, we do not use that word." "I didn't use the word. It was the bad boy on the playground." And she gets to do it a third time. Ah, you understand the genius of the scaffolding, right? In other words, my Ash was, smart enough to realize she could do something she's not supposed to do, say something she's not supposed to say, but she can blame it on somebody else. Genius. Genius. Now, Chaucer is playing the game here. He wants us to say, "Oh, it's okay that you drop the F-bomb because it's not really you, it's rather the summoner who will drop the F-bomb, and all you're doing is just recording what he said." Again, what is the irony? There was no summoner. Chaucer made it up. Genius. Hey, you ever watch the news? And those people are standing out, for example, on the White House lawn, and that journalist is holding that microphone, and she will say, "A Washington White House insider today reported that blah, 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 blah." A Washington White House insider. Who are you quoting? "Oh, no. I have to protect my sources. I can't tell you who it is." Do you ever wonder if maybe the Washington White House insider that the journalist is quoting is somebody who does not exist at all? The journalist just made it up. We need some news. We need somebody to say something. We need a bit of controversy started. Come up with a good quote. "Oh, a White House insider today reported that blah, 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 blah." Really? Like, who is that person? "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't divulge my sources." Pure Chaucer. And it works really well because why? He can stand behind his creation and say to anyone who's offended, "It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was so-and-so who said it. Well, where is that so-and-so? I can't remember. I met him in a bar on our way down to Canterbury to go on that journey. And then afterwards, we all just kind of broke up and went our separate ways. I can't really remember. Notice there's only a couple of them who he even provides names for. Remember that? The rest of them are just kind of these contrived people who appears to be real, but it's actually totally a fiction. The genius of Chaucer is to begin by saying, I hope you're not offended. Of course, it's pure irony. Why? Because he knows every time he drops the F-bomb, and I'm speaking both literally and metaphorically, every time he drops the F-bomb, he knows that he's going to be insulting, just like my Ash knew at 5 that she was insulting her mother when she dropped the F-bomb at the dinner table. And yet, she could blame it on the bad boy at the school, right, out on the playground, and she could get away with it in some way. Notice, we'll continue with Chaucer. He says, for certainly, he'll defend himself for using the F word. He has to report what was said. Line 750, the last 2 lines of page 115. For certainly, as you all know so well, he who repeats a tale after a man, top of page 116, is bound to say as nearly as he can each single word if he remembers it, however rudely spoken or unfit, or else the tale he tells will be untrue, the things invented and the phrases new. In other words, put it in your notes. He says, I have to tell the truth. Even if it hurts me, I have to tell the truth. The irony, of course, is that he's totally making all of this up. Notice he continues, he may not flinch, although it were his brother. If he says one word, he must say the other. In other words, I have to report it the way they said it. And if they drop the F-bomb, I've got to write the F-bomb. Don't blame me. Let's put it in our notes this way. What he's really saying is, don't kill the messenger. Have you ever heard that phrase? Don't kill the messenger means, I'm just giving you the information. Don't be mad at me, be mad at somebody else, right? Of course, let's point out that Chaucer is both message and messenger, because why? He invented it all. He made it all up himself. But now he's going to turn, Chaucer. He's going to turn and give 3 reasons why he has to, quote-unquote, tell the truth. The first reason will make sense given his audience. Look at it with me. I'm on page 116, line 759. This won't shock you. And Christ himself spoke broad in Holy Writ, as you know. There's nothing there unfit. In other words, he says, Jesus Christ always told the truth. Therefore, I'm going to have to tell the truth. The irony, of course, is he's totally making it up. But be that as it may, he says, I always have to tell the truth because Jesus Christ. Now, of course, it makes sense to somehow reference the church, especially note the irony of this at 2b. The irony of saying, Christ said we always have to tell the truth, so I'm going to tell the truth, even though technically I'm lying because I made all this up. Right? But what he's going to say in Canterbury Tales about people who are affiliated with Christ in the church, a lot of times it's going to be very, very uncomfortable, especially when we get to that partner's prologue here in a while. His second reason, if Christ is his first validation or reason, the second one is Plato. Read it with me, 761. And Plato says, the great Greek philosopher, right? Plato says for those with power to read, the word should be as cousin as to the deed. Notice for those with power to read. In other words, for you educated, right, who know Plato, he said the word should be as cousin to the deed. In other words, you should always tell the truth. So if the first validation is Christ and the second validation is Plato, notice he's covered all of his bases. He's covered the theology base, the religious base, but he's also covered the secular base. Brilliant. It's a brilliant move on his part. Further, the third reason, I beg you to forgive it me if I neglect the order and degree in what is due to rank in what I've planned. I'm short of wit, I'm short of wit, as you will understand. Okay, let's pause and now make a moment here, observation. He says, Christ said you always have to tell the truth, so I'm going to tell the truth. Plato said you always have to tell the truth, so I'm going to tell the truth. But you know what? If that doesn't work for you, and I still am offending you because I dropped the F-bomb, both literally and metaphorically, then please forgive me because I'm short of wit. Now, what does that mean? Write down in your notes what you think that means. If somebody says, I'm short of wit, what does that mean? I'm short of wit means I'm just stupid. I'm an idiot. Please forgive me. I am just dumb. Which is, of course, darkly ironic because if Chaucer is anything, he's what? Yeah, he's pretty brilliant, right? He's smart enough to know exactly what he's doing, right? And of course, this is a game that gets played at any high school hall every day of the year. Would you agree with me? So for example, somebody wants some information from somebody else and walks up and says, dude, I heard what happened this weekend. And the other person goes, oh, you heard about that? Oh yeah, but I only heard some of you. What exactly happened? Bam, now they're ready to start telling you, and you had no idea at all. In other words, interesting kind of rhetorical techniques that Chaucer is going to employ. It's kind of sneaky, right? It's kind of under the carpet, and yet it's, when we look at it, obviously, brilliant way to tell a story, right? And of course, let's put it in our notes. Chaucer is the father of the English language, no question. But Chaucer is in many ways also the father or the beginner of a whole tradition of storytelling that will emphasize first characterization. You gotta have a good character. If you have a good character, that cook with his running sore on his knee, that Sumner with those huge zits all over his face and reeking of garlic, you gotta have good characters. But then the second thing Chaucer is going to really remind all artists from him on is you gotta have a good story. A good story, a really good way to tell a story, what we will call in storytelling point of view, the way we tell the story. Here, it's Chaucer telling the words of the partner who is going to be telling a story. It's very much like an onion, or of course if you're a Shrek fan, parfait. That is to say, it's layered, so that Chaucer, the speaker of this stuff, can stand far, far behind it and kind of tell his story, but never be directly indicted. It is genius. Now, interestingly, we haven't actually met all our characters. We actually have one more, and we'll meet him now on page 116, line 767, and that is our host. By the way, let's just pause for a moment, and since we're in this vein on page 116, and let's just read here in that little box that you see there that says, the